Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but what does that actually look like? Look no further than iExcel, the ultimate online learning and teaching platform for K to 12. iExcel gives you meaningful insights that drive real progress, and research can prove it. Studies in nearly all 50 states across the U.S. show that schools that use iExcel outperform other schools on state tests. Educators who use iExcel love that they can easily see how their schools are performing in real time to make better instructional decisions. And iExcel doesn't stop at just data. iExcel also brings an entire ecosystem of resources for your teachers with a complete curriculum, personalized learning plans, and so much more. It's no wonder that iExcel is used in 95 of the top 100 school districts. Ready to join them? Visit iexcel.com/PM to get started.
You're listening to Monday Matters, a Principal Matters podcast production.
Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker back with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, for another Monday Matters. Jen, we're going to do something a little different this time. Normally, Monday Matters are an opportunity for you and I to just catch up and talk about current events. This week, though, I'm going to bring a mutual friend to the conversation. You and I both met and worked with Trevor Timmerberg, who's now the Assistant Superintendent for the Archdiocese of Louisville's Catholic Schools, and our good friend there, Amy Nall. She has worked with both of us in principal preparation, and Trevor and I have been working with a couple of groups this year with Masterminds and Grow Academies. So we're going to transition into that conversation, but you've been there. You've worked with the Louisville leaders before too, so these are friends of yours as well.
That's right. They're a great group, and I'm so happy for Trevor. So yeah, let's dig right in.
All right. Trevor Timmerberg, welcome to Monday Matters. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. And this week, I want to introduce you to my special guest, Dr. Trevor Timmerberg. Dr. Trevor Timmerberg serves as the Assistant Superintendent of Catholic Schools for the Archdiocese of Louisville, where he supports principals and school leaders in advancing Catholic identity, academic excellence, and mission-driven leadership across the district. A former principal of St. Mary Academy, Dr. Timmerberg helped lead the school to become a nationally recognized Model PLC at work campus, and is regarded for his commitment to forming disciples through collaborative, faith-centered school cultures. His background spans educational leadership, teacher formation, strategic planning, and governance, and he's passionate about helping Catholic educators integrate the gospel mandate with the best of professional practice. He was also an Army officer and is a practicing Catholic whose work is rooted in service, stewardship, and developing leaders who inspire others to holiness and excellence. Dr. Trevor Timmerberg, thank you for joining me on Principal Matters today. Why don't you fill in the gaps on that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you before I start jumping into some questions with you.
Wow. So thanks for that. I think it covered most of it. Thanks for having me, Will. It's always good to see you and collaborate together. Fill in the gaps and maybe something interesting. Well, I will tell you that in my household, my wife is the primary educator in the family. She's also a teacher. Actually within the same diocese as well. We met teaching in public school together, and she has a line that I love, and I've used it so many times. She says, "I don't want to be the next president, but I'd like to teach one." And I was like, what a transformational impact of education can have. And so she's the model for that as well. And we have a beautiful little girl, she's almost 2.5 years old, named Gwen. And so that's the most important work I do each and every day, is investing in our relationship with them and trying to raise our daughters as a godly young woman.
Well, Trevor, I've had the privilege of knowing you now for a few years. Mm-hmm. You were once upon a time as a principal going through one of my Grow Academies that was facilitated by Amy Nall, who's now the superintendent of the Archdiocese of Catholic Schools there in Louisville, Kentucky. And then you transitioned into the role of assistant superintendent and have been co-facilitating with me Grow Academies, a mastermind, as we lead groups of principals across your system of schools. And for those who may not be familiar, because in my audience, I have public school educators, private school educators, charter school educators, and Catholic schools are unique to the mission that they have in some ways that are a little bit different than others, especially in the way your system of schools work. So even before I dive into some other questions with you, talk can you help listeners kind of get a feel for what it means to support a system of schools?
Yeah, so it is unique in that regard because we are a system of schools versus a school system. And why that phraseology, for lack of a better word, is used is because everything falls under the Archdiocese of Louisville umbrella, but within that we have some more independence, depending on if a school has a certain religious order, like the St. Xavier's, the Xavier Brotherhood, or the Sisters of Mercy, or the Ursuline Sisters. So there's a little bit more autonomy in some capacities there with independent religious orders that schools are connected to. Within the elementary schools, that's probably where we have the most influence because those are those are parochial schools. So they have a church and a school, and the school is a ministry of that church. Obviously still within the collective Archdiocese of Louisville. So there's some uniqueness there. And as you said before, and our superintendent does a fantastic job with this, is that she talks about leading from influence as opposed to authority. And I think ultimately in the best leadership capacities, we are leading through influence versus directives, orders, or authority. We have authority because of credibility, but our influence is through our connection and collaboration with the leaders that we serve in the schools, and then also in support of, what's at the center, which is developing those students spiritually, academically, socially, and emotionally.
Thanks for that explanation. So my relationship with the Archdiocese of Louisville schools began all the way back when Dr. Mary Beth Bowling was superintendent, and she had been a principal and had been listening to my show. So this goes way back. And I was attending a conference in Louisville, Kentucky with the National Association of Secondary School Principals when I was still a state executive. And we had coffee together while I was there because she had been a listener to my show and struck up a friendship. She had given me an invitation to come and just do some presenting at the end of a school year with some of your professional development happening there. And then the following year invited me to pilot some virtual work with leaders through a Grow Academy, and then eventually through a mastermind. And boy, Trevor, I have every layer I unpeel across the system of schools that you guys are serving just makes me more deeply appreciate this wonderful work that you're doing. And I valued this so much, as this is the reason I brought you to today's conversation, because so often my guests I'm interviewing because of the practices that they're involved in. And I do want to talk about your practices, but today I just want to be really intentional with listeners. And I'm bringing you here because we've co-facilitated a lot of work together. And sometimes I realize I don't always showcase the work that's happening outside of the podcast with the very groups that have been birthed because of the podcast. And so let's go back in time a little bit in your work before we jump into what we've been co-facilitating.
Sure.
Because as a former principal of St. Mary Academy, you learned a lot of lessons, and you led your school to a recognition as a Model PLC at Work campus. So before we even jump into the things we're doing today, could you talk to listeners about some of the lessons you learned through those years you served as a principal?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that opportunity. And I think to begin with, I'd say both Mary Beth, previous superintendent, who's now in the vice chancellor role, and Amy, who it was the assistant superintendent, now in the superintendent role, are both phenomenal leaders in their own right. Mm-hmm. And equally, they're both champions of continuous improvement. So it is not a surprise to anyone that Mary Beth tracked you down to start talking about how we develop our leaders, and both have really set such a great example for what leadership looks like and building the capacity of others. And I would say that from my experience of working as a leader within the diocese under their leadership, and being a principal at St. Mary, is you're only as strong as the capacity of your team. And I think that's kind of a universal truth within leadership. But the way I interpret being a good leader is similar to Christ's example for us, is building and developing good leaders around you. Because the work can't have a single point of failure, which means it can't just be reliant upon one person. It has to be distributed. There has to be ownership that's shared. And, I think very literally that ownership can outweigh strategy and the effectiveness of how your company, your organization, your team operates. Strategy, intentionality, all are critical factors of leadership and being successful. But the work that I got to experience, that I got to be a part of when we earned that international recognition of being a Model PLC at work school, only came out because I invested my time supporting our leaders, who then are supporting our teacher leaders, who are supporting our students. And so it ripples out from there. But it has so very little to do with any of the real work that I did with the students in the classroom. But it's my job to develop the capacity of those leaders around me and then give them the autonomy, the authority, and the ownership to just take charge and let their skill set and let their unique gifts manifest in that collaborative effort. But yeah, I think you're really only as strong as that capacity of your team, and the job of the leader is to develop them.
I'm so glad you said that, Trevor. At the time of this recording, I was on the phone this morning with a principal who'd just been listening to one of the shows, and he was talking about master schedules, talking about changes within the schedule, talking about those hard choices principals have to make when maybe someone's performance means it's time for someone else to step in to an area, and how hard those decisions are that leaders are making every single day, because not everyone can see all the data you see. But when I talk to leaders like that, I come right back to just what you said. Those nights of sleep that you lose, those hard conversations you have, those ruminations that you're going through as you're in your morning workout, all that stuff you're trying to wrap your mind around means you're developing the capacities of your entire school campus, those who serve kids, so they can serve kids. So it's not necessarily what you're doing to serve the students directly. It's what you're doing to build the capacity of those who are. Now you're not only an educator, you're a military officer, you're very committed as a practicing Catholic, and you're an education leader. So I'm just going to ask you, with all three of those hats, I didn't want to lose the opportunity to ask this question so our listeners can hear you talk about this too. But how have your experiences in those three spheres shaped the way you approach leadership?
I would say, yeah, they're unique in the sense that they seem like they're all over the place. Being a school principal and then Army officer simultaneously, they sound like they're very different worlds. And while there's a lot of differences within them, I do think leadership is kind of a universal language, in the sense there's some principles and some characteristics within leadership that transcend any contextual circumstance that you're in. And really, I think that for me, as a man of faith and someone who leads as a ministry within the church through education, to me, it all comes back to Christ did not come to this world to be served, but to serve. And so servant leadership is the only path that I see with being a leader. And I think that is applicable in any of the categories that we have looked at or spoken about today, and really being a steward of the gifts, the talents, and the people that are entrusted to us, that we serve, that we have the responsibility and the privilege to serve as a leader. Being a good steward of all those things is how we demonstrate that servant leadership. And one of the things that I really learned through athletics early on in my life and career, and then was really fortified through the military, because it's so visceral and apparent, but I get to see the benefit of through education, is the leader has to set the example. They have to be the standard for those they serve. So that looks like modeling that. I mean, that's what Christ did for us. He witnessed that to us. So we have to be that witness to others, to try to, point people towards our goal, our objectives. I talked about having ownership in our first kind of question, but I really think having a plan is important. Like being strategic and intentional is essential to being a leader. But we have to remain flexible enough to adapt to that. If we say we're going to go this way, but then we hit a dead end, we can't just keep running into the same wall over and over again. We have to adapt, be flexible, be collaborative, to find a path forward. But the leader has to help set chart the path for people so that they know where they're going to and why they're doing it, right? We leaders, and this was a militarism for officers, you tell your NCOs, your non-commissioned officers, I'll give you the what. So the what we need to do or what we need to accomplish, the mission, and the why we're doing it, why it's important, why it's relevant, significant to the larger operation. But then you implore those subordinate leaders, who are the boots on the ground doing all the action, to find the how. right? Because they're the closest interfacing with what is happening real time, and they're the ones working with the people. So that's in school. I think that looks like your APs, your teacher leaders, and the teachers, because the mission is focused on supporting the students, but the how gets taken care of by those people that I just listed. We give the what and the why, and we share that. But then the ownership of that action, that execution of that plan, happens with those leaders.
Well said, Trevor. You know me, I'm a storyteller. So even as you were saying that, I was thinking about a couple of examples that have gone through my mind when I think about leadership. One was years ago when my wife and I were watching the Downton Abbey series on Masterpiece Theater. And, you have this very wealthy family in this huge estate. And then you get to understand who lives there and then all their staff. And I think sometimes leaders picture themselves as like the quote unquote head of the estate. When in reality, when I watched that show, I was so more often relating to the butler, like to the staff. I was like, this staff is actually what's making this place hum. And leaders recognize that no matter what my title is, at the end of the day, it's the service that I'm creating for everyone around me so they can have the experience here that they really want. And so another example I was thinking about was a book I read last summer that a friend recommended called Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara.
Yeah.
And what I love about that book is Will Guidara owns one of the most successful restaurants in the world. And the whole heart of his work and all of the models that he gives through that book are his unbending commitment to creating more and more service to the people who are coming into his restaurant. And so, when I think about your work as a military officer serving your country, as a practicing Catholic who's following the model of your Savior, as an education leader who's showing up to be a servant leader, I think all of that too, Trevor, informs the commitment that not just you've made, but the Archdiocese, your system of leaders has made to growth. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to talk about what that looks like, because you do that on a lot of different spheres besides just with me. You guys have lots of ways that you serve and support your leaders. And so even before we jump into what we do together, can you give a sense for anyone else out there who supports leaders? Because I have a lot of listeners that are principals, but others that serve in roles just like yours. What are some of the different layers you guys have in place to make sure you're serving and supporting your leaders to do their best work?
Yeah, and it is a huge commitment within our diocese and by the previous leaders that I mentioned earlier, in their commitment to supporting our folks is, there's various layers or groups of leaders, but I would call them layers of leadership because they all are in the school. So we meet regularly with our principals, with our assistant principals, counselors, and our learning coordinators. And our learning coordinators help support students with different learning needs, so that require maybe additional accommodations for getting the material in class. So with regularity, we meet with those groups like almost monthly for some of them, and some of them a little bit more spread out in between. And then on top of that, then we also offer additional professional development just specific to teacher leaders in the classroom that happen throughout the school year. But then also there's a large chunk of that happens, kind of during the outside the normal school cycle, where they can be there fully present, not be away from their students in their class. But I just see that when we look at creating a scope and sequence for, an entire year for those different groups of leaders, well, we're really looking at a strategic view of how do we support, based on what the schools need, how are we supporting these leaders to be effective in their roles of advancing the mission of our schools and meeting the needs of their students. And that talk about being able to ebb and flow and remain flexible. But the majority of our work is centered around that support of those folks in the schools, which I think is really important to maintain a relevance to why do we exist and how do we support them. And there's several other things that we do that are, equally as critical, but that's one of the ways through professional development that we really try to maintain that priority to be, for the forward-facing individuals in the buildings.
Well, and let me just give you some kudos and your other system of leaders and listeners. I'm saying this for a reason. not only are you guys committed to meeting regularly with your principals and APs and counselors and learning coordinators, and then providing additional PD for your teacher leaders as well as for your teachers at large, and then we'll talk about what you and I, what our partnership looks like and some of that support too, Trevor. But I know this because I know your leaders. You guys don't just meet to meet. You meet with a purpose, and you said what those purposes were, which is how do we advance the mission and how do we meet the needs of your students? And I'm just saying that out loud because, again, last week I was on a call with an assistant principal from a district who was asking me questions about what we do in our masterminds and Grow Academies because, and I won't name names, but she's in a place where she doesn't see collaborative leadership opportunities, and she feels like meetings are just to meet. There's not a rich diving into the practices of this work among the other leaders when they are pulled together. And I can't tell you how many leaders I've talked to that feel like they just meet to meet. And so feel free to respond to that if you'd like, but go ahead, because you have some thought.
No, I think you're right. I think that's really important. A lot of what we strive towards when we're having these really difficult conversations, I mean, we kind of really work ourselves up about it because, as you said, we want it to be valuable to the leaders that we're serving. And so we really look at what information can we provide them that's valuable, and then what resources or practical takeaways can we help support them with so they can take it back to their building. And a lot of that has to do with the internetworking within the leaders in our own diocese, which we really hear their feedback and then try to support them through that right as well. But I'll say this is a huge testament to the people that came before me with Mary Beth and Amy, who, like I said before, have really just championed this focus. Because I do think it's unique and it requires a lot of time, energy, and resources to promote. But then equally, we have leaders in our buildings from the classroom all the way into the principal's office that want this. They have a desire that is not satiated by just the normal kind of PD cadence that maybe they that we see in other areas, but they want it. They show up, they're invested, and then they're working outside of that time with each other to continue to advance that. So I am just humbled by it and just so encouraged to see the kind of the vitality of our leaders and how they go after enriching their schools and making their schools a better place to be to support those students.
Well, I'm inspired by it too. And one of the things I appreciate about you, and you and I were talking about this off the air, with some of the partnerships that I have with groups that I've continued to work with now for several years in a large capacity, we're usually having these conversations in December, January, February, and we're finalizing them in March, and then usually getting everything ironed out by June so that the next school year we've started. So if anyone's listening to these conversations and you're like, man, I'd love to have systems supporting my leaders, then spring is the time to do it. And summer is the time to finalize it. And so, Trevor, part of this is very self-serving on my part because I get the blessing and benefit of being with you and co-facilitating some of these Grow Academies, masterminds. We lead right now groups for principals in a Grow, assistant principals in a Grow, and then experienced leaders in a mastermind. Can you describe what it's like to be a part of a Grow Leadership Academy and what it was like to be as a participating principal, because you went through that academy, but now what is it like to co-facilitate that as someone who's supporting leaders?
Yeah, one of my favorite things that I've learned from being a part of Grow Academy, specifically, I learned it in these groups, but it was like it was a characteristic that I had experienced previously, but I didn't have a kind of a tangible. I couldn't put my finger on it to narrow it down. But it is the phrase. This is a common phrase within our archdiocese and leaders that have experienced this. Is the smartest person in the room is the room, and I see that smile, Will, because I know it came from these groups. And really, to me, that's just a reflection of collaboration is the heartbeat of continuous improvement. Because that's signaling that we don't do this alone. We're not intended to do this alone, and that we grow more by being in proximity, being in collaboration with one another. And I just think that is absolutely a truth that I have learned from Grow, and that I continue to see it in the different groups that we do. And it's really kind of a reflection of how a lot of leaders in our diocese that have experienced this continue to operate, which is to their benefit and the benefit of the buildings and the communities they serve.
You're making me smile because I was, I talked to a lot of leaders one-on-one, and I was coaching a leader in a session who was really struggling with some feedback that the board wanted on some improvement around data. And I asked the question, okay, let's pause the current problem that you're facing, and I want you to go back to a past problem. How did you find the best outcome and solution for something you had to solve really big in the past? She thought for a moment and she said, when I pulled people together and asked for their input. and I didn't try to solve it by myself. And so I was just like, there you go. The smartest person in the room is always the room. And so, yes, you have to be a leader who makes that final decision, and sometimes really hard ones. But man, what a benefit to bring yourself together with others and work through that collaboratively. You've also met with me regularly with mastermind groups, and that's a little bit different because the Grow, we really focus a lot on the hats of leadership and those common norms of the different responsibilities that leaders carry. For those in the mastermind, we still read and discuss some content, but we also try to transition so someone brings a hot seat topic. So can you describe the differences that you see in those groups, and maybe what have those experiences been like for you?
Yeah, the mastermind group is not a group that I had the privilege to attend as just a participant, as a building level leader. But man, is it been a really cool experience to help co-facilitate that. And Will's being very generous when he says co-facilitate. I feel like I'm just a student in there, like everyone else is, trying to learn from it. But I'll tell you one thing is I have learned so much, especially in this new role that I'm in now, is that it's so much better to lead with questions than answers. And we've talked about being the advice monster before in these mastermind groups. And I think that it comes from the right place for leaders of you're trying to help the people that you serve. Therefore, you want to have answers and you want to have guidance and direction for them. But more often than not, the way I have experienced the most success in getting there is by providing prompts of questions and reflection that allow us to arrive at the answer versus just dictating an answer or being the advice monster and trying to solve that problem. And I think the mastermind is a perfect reflection of that, because we go through an exercise, and I won't spoil all the details, but essentially somebody comes in with a topic or an issue that they're trying to discuss, and confidentiality, sensitivity, all that's kept in place. But the other leaders in the group are helping support a reflective practice for that leader to go through. And I would say probably nine times out of 10, no one gives the principal the answer or advice. They come upon it very naturally because they have a good teammates prompting them to try to push and challenge their way of thinking, of understanding and perspective, that get them to that process, or walk them through that process that get them to that resolution, or maybe it's not a resolution, maybe it's just the next best action. And sometimes in leadership, you're really just making the next best choice versus having the answer to everything. But having a good reflective practice and good peers to support that is so valuable. And I really feel like it's the verse from Scripture about iron sharpening iron. That mastermind group is that you have some people that have been forged in the fire in leadership, and now they're using that experience and that their skills that have been developed to help support one another. And it's just a beautiful example of that collaboration.
Well, Trevor, that's probably the best explanation of a mastermind that it's way better than I could have given. So thank you for doing that. I didn't put this in my notes, but I want to go ahead and ask you this question. Someone may be listening that's like, man, how could my team get involved? How could I pull a group of leaders together? How could I potentially get Will to partner with us? Would you mind talking about what that experience has been like for you and me? Because that's what we do. And that's what we've done, and that's what we're doing. So what could someone expect if they wanted to jump into a conversation like that?
Yeah, and I have walked into this process and gotten to experience it from a very well-developed and well-established. So it's not a reflective of my leadership whatsoever. It's Amy and the leaders that came before me. However, I will say the hardest part when you consider professional development, I think one of the hardest parts is making it feel relevant and significant to the individual, but also the group of people. And when you think of virtual professional development, it's like, oh, perfect. I have an hour or 90 minutes to check my email and do everything else I wanted to do on my computer while I'm stuck in a screen. but I would say it's anything but that.
Yeah.
And I would say one of the gifts that Will has, I've told this to him before, is you become a kind of a fabric of the community for professional development, for continuous improvement for our folks, and they feel like they know you and are known by you. And I think you do a great job, Will, of establishing that rapport and how you even orient the groups to begin with, and some of the work that gets done before you get into the content of the masterminds or the Grow Academies that allow you to feel like you're part of now of a small team, right? And you're on this mission together, which is to continuous improvement. And so I would say that's part of it too, and that you've established through your leadership, is that it doesn't feel virtual, right? It feels like all the benefits of being there in person. And then I'd say additionally, most of what is accomplished during these sessions, a lot of it can be either directly transferred in an area of stress or an area of opportunity in your buildings, but also now you have a new group of leaders that have come together that have really kind of, like I said, that iron sharpens iron. Now they're kind of like a small team. And so if something comes up in the future, you have a couple people that already built into your system that understand it, but from a different perspective that you can lean on. And I think there's a ton of value in that. Because like I said, the work's too important to be done alone.
Yeah, no, that's great, Trevor. I wrote down several things you said that if you want your professional development to be relevant and significant, you have to make sure that it's the right fit for your people. And a virtual setting can seem, on the one hand, easy, but on the other hand, like that question mark, is people really going to take advantage of this as an opportunity to grow or just an excuse to be on their computers? And so we are very intentional setting our norms and expectations for how we're going to be together. And man, I just have to hand it to your leaders. They are present when we are together. There's no such thing as somebody's videos off, or, they are there and engaged. And I love that you said it's transferable to other areas, because the solutions that we're helping each other discover in those moments can be rinsed and repeated the next time someone's facing a challenge too. And those skills that we're learning together on asking hard questions or clarifying questions or paraphrasing or questions before answers, you said that too. Those are things that can be modeled later too. There may be leaders listening though who don't have a system like yours that's as committed to continued growth for their leaders. Maybe they don't have the access to that kind of growth. But that doesn't mean they can't keep growing. So I also just wanted to ask you this before we wrap up. What advice would you have for a leader who just wants to continue their growth, even if they have to do it on their own? They don't have someone like you there committed to helping them to grow with a team.
Yeah, I would say there's an infinite amount of resources available in any variety of which way that you learn the best. There's obviously books and different courses you could take through academic institutions, but there's also podcasts. There's also newsletters that go out. I also really encourage people to, and the superintendent and I, Amy, have led this through one of our leadership development groups, is that we're reading a Simon Sinek book in support of our educational leaders. Well, translate. Well, back to my original point about being a universal language, sometimes I think we can make better connections by learning in leadership areas that are outside of education, because then we have this different vantage point. We can see things more clearly. But we are only as limited as our imagination when it comes to that. And a lot of times, like I, started listening to your podcast, Will, and so then I'm familiar with stuff. So then I read your books. This is before we were in partnership in the role I'm in now. But then I get to hear the other people you have on your podcast. So then that gives me a new rabbit hole of area to learn more about. And I just think that's a fantastic way to kind of just follow the breadcrumbs of people that you're like, ooh, I like what they had to say about this. And all of a sudden you're learning from a new person, and then you're bridging connections that way. And then I think ultimately find somebody else, whether in your district or outside of there or whatever it is that you can yoke yourself with, and like, hey, I'm committed to learning. Can we learn together? Right? I'm reading this. Can we talk about that? I'd love to know what you're talking about, or anything like that. That collaboration, I think, is so critical to just continual development, whether professional, personal, or anywhere in between.
You're making me smile, because I am a very curious person. And so it just brings me so much joy to search out those curiosities in the guests that I get to bring, the books that I'm reading, and then realizing other people are connecting with those same folks that lead them down pathways. I love it that you also said, but don't just read books that are education, like the fact you guys are reading Simon Sinek, or that I was reading Unreasonable Hospitality. I mean, read outside of your profession, even fiction. I love reading fiction because it opens my eyes to perspectives I wouldn't have had otherwise. Before we close, Trevor, first of all, I just want to say thank you for your commitment to education. You've been serving in so many roles for so many years, to students and to teachers and to schools, and now in this very important role, supporting schools across an entire system. You're also active in your own professional growth. And so I want leaders to know how they can find you or stay connected with you. And I'm happy to put any links in the show notes. But what are some final words of encouragement or advice you would have for school leaders as they're thinking about their growth and the growth of their teams?
Yeah, what resonates most with me when I think about encouragement, or we say advice, but really direction, is that it's a scripture verse that, we are many parts, but one body. So we're better together. And I think that is a fundamental truth, and I think the Christ example for that is, yes, we serve different roles and have different responsibilities and have different capacities with which we help or we're invested, but we are meant to be in communion and community with one another. And that's how we really develop the students that are at the center of everything we do. And I support a leader, Amy, through the superintendent's office, which allows us to really invest in that work and sets the example for that. So I'm so thankful in that regard that I'm on a great team. And I would say, whatever role of leadership you're in, I read something recently, or maybe it was a snippet of something recently talking about that, but lead from where you are, right? And there's always opportunity to lead, whether you're in the classroom, whether you're at home, whether you're in the front office, central office, or anywhere in between. Everybody has the opportunity to express their own leadership. But specifically those leaders of the school, I'm talking about principals and the backbone of the school, those assistant principals, you are doing important work. And I say this to my APs all the time, is that you are so important, and your role exists to support students to continue to strive to keep the main thing. And it's hard to do, and it can feel impossible, like you're getting compressed from every direction. But you leaders are so important in your role. And I just continue to encourage and pray for you all, that you keep up that good work, because the students matter and what you do matters in the larger scale of things. And for me, if I'm on LinkedIn, but really more important than connecting with me or following me or anything like that is get connected with the people that you serve with. You'll realize that there's people around you that are infinitely more impressive than you would ever imagine. They have so much insight to offer. I'm continually humbled by those that I serve with and around, that just what they do every day. I'm just so humbled by it.
Well, Trevor, thank you for that wonderful wrap up. And for Principal Matters listeners, we'll put a link to Trevor's LinkedIn and your email address, because I'll say this, as important it is for leaders to connect with others and grow. I've already sent several leaders your direction, Trevor, when I'm running into somebody that's really curious about something in leadership or growth. And you've been so generous. So thank you for your generosity and just connecting with people I've sent your way. And I know someone listening right now may want to reach out to you. And so if you do want to do that, check the show notes for Trevor's contact information. I guarantee he will follow up. And then Trevor, just a quick shout out. You've mentioned these names, and I know I have too at the beginning, but Mary Beth Bowling, who's now chancellor, former superintendent, Amy Nall, the current superintendent, who co-facilitated many of these groups with me for a long time, is now at the helm of leadership there too. So we both are big fans of both of them. And if either of them are listening to the show, thank you both for your investments that have made today's conversation possible. And Principal Matters listeners, I just want you to walk away today. The title of today's show is Mission Driven Leadership. And I want you to walk away today recognizing that your mission matters, and your investment in your growth is what makes it possible for you to have the capacity to fulfill it. So lean in, keep investing in that growth and in the growth of your leaders. And until next time, thanks for doing what matters. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, would you take a moment and like, share, subscribe, or leave us a review? In fact, if you share it out with a friend, even more people can become a part of these conversations. Sign up for our newsletter at williamdparker.com for even more free resources. And don't forget to check out our website to learn more about our books, professional development offerings, Grow Academies, masterminds, executive coaching, and keynote presentations. Wow, let's keep learning together. Thank you for doing what matters.
Monday Matters.